The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
Does this give the crypto sector a wide halo of credibility, particularly post the FTX saga now?
Absolutely. And also to answer your question, I think it's MiCA. And I'll tell you why. Because the MiCA legislation was really built on MiFID, which is a Markets and Financial Instruments Directive, which came out many years ago. So there's a lot of similarities here. And I think Jack is right. I mean, this provides that kind of harmonization across the whole EU bloc that we've been looking for the last few years. So there's been this patchwork of regulations and licensing registrations that have been required, and now that's going to give us like a level playing field across the industry.
So do you think that this changes the way the Americans come up with any proposal, if they do come up with anything at all? I mean, the Congress seems to be in kind of chaos right now. But do you think that this maybe provides a guide rails for the Americans to come up with regulation on their own, or other countries as well, to say, all right, let's try to be as close to compliance with MiCA? Or do you think that the Americans, being the Americans, will be like, no, we don't want to listen to those Europeans. We're going to do our own thing?
I think they're using this as an opportunity to learn. I know there was a congressional delegation in Brussels a few weeks ago, meeting with the people who actually drafted the original versions of MiCA. So there is a lot of back and forth between the U.S. lawmakers and what's happening here in the EU. Will it be exactly the same? Definitely not. But in the U.S., you have BitLicense, for instance, and a lot of other sort of existing licensing around cryptocurrency that will also help be the basis of that new legislation in the U.S.
I think Jack had
Yeah. No, I just wanted to ask as well. Is there anything you wish had been included in MiCA that wasn't actually in there? And what are you going to be? Obviously, there's now a process that needs to happen with various EU agencies implementing the rules. So what will you be looking out for as they implement and enforce and kind of fill in the details of what we have on the table?
Yeah, so if you're an exchange like Bitstamp, excuse me, I mean, we've been operating in Europe for the last 11, 12 years. We've had a payment institution license for the last 7 years. And so we already have the same requirements around AML. So if you're new to this space, you're not going to have very, very stringent AML requirements for account opening. So that's probably going to change in the industry for those new entrants coming in. And the other thing is that MiCA has a 12-month and 18-month how to trigger. So if you're e-money issuance or stablecoin issuers, you've got 12 months to get ready for that. And then the rest of the legislation comes in 18 months. So it is phased over time. For us, we're looking at stablecoins and being ready for that e-money issuance. And then the rest of the governance, if you've already been regulated in the EU, you're probably in pretty good shape. But what I like about MiCA is that it gives more transparency to consumers on what they're investing in, what they're buying on the exchange. So that's really the best thing that's coming out of MiCA.
Yeah, but does it go far enough in terms of protecting customers in events like the collapse of FTX, or fall short?
I think it's the right first step. Would it have seen what happened at FTX or other of these collapses that happened last year, even banking in this year? The regulators are also getting their understanding of the space, right? And sort of really depends on which member state that you're licensed in, and the regulator and their view of how they work with the new license entities there.
All right. So I just want to. Yeah. Sorry, Lawrence. Go ahead.
Yeah. Specifically for Bitstamp, I mean, do you have to do any changes, or how long have you guys been prepping for this? If you've been prepping for it, and do you see any changes that you have to do to any procedures that you currently have in place? And if so, how long do you think it'll take before you come into full compliance with MiCA?
I'm sure we've been working on this ever since the original legislation was proposed, right? We've been following this very, very closely. And we have, like many other players, the virtual asset service provider registrations in many countries: Italy, Spain, France, the Netherlands, Luxembourg. And that has also given us the basis for maybe an incremental change, but not, it's not a step change for us. For those that are new to this business and coming into the European market is a step change in how they operate. Biggest thing, again, is those white papers and the disclosures, how we're communicating with customers on what's available on the exchange. So that for us is making sure that we're really providing that disclosure transparency to investors and also working with our institutional partners. I think they also find this as an important step in being able to trust the exchanges and others that are licensed under MiCA.
All right, I just want to bring in Jack right now for a question that's bothering me a little bit at least. There's the G7, there's the G20, there's the IMF, there's the Financial Stability Board. All four of these entities in some way or the other are basically saying one thing, which is that we need global consensus to come up with crypto rules. And India has been saying that as the G20 president, that we cannot come up with any global crypto rules or any nation's crypto rules till we have global consensus on crypto rules. And that's what they're waiting for. That's what they have asked the FSB and the IMF to come up with by October this year. Why is it that the EU has come out and come up with their law while the rest of the world is essentially saying, wait, we need global consensus?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the EU officials I talk to say, yeah, we do need global rules. Like the EU is doing this. It's not enough. But they are expecting and hoping that the rest of the world is going to follow suit. But maybe they're also hoping a little bit, if they're the first people to move, then they get to define what the terms of this debate are. So in a lot of other areas, like kind of privacy regulation, the data protection regulation, we've seen a lot of areas where the EU regulates first and the rest of the world copies them. And that's a pretty good thing from Brussels' perspective, because it means they get to decide the rest of the rules that the social media networks will follow. What I'm really interested in is whether there's now a worry that in the interim period, EU companies like Bitstamp that will have a base in the EU will be unfairly competing against people who aren't bothering to follow these rules. So if you're based in the Bahamas or Antigua, or you're not based anywhere at all, as some crypto companies claim to be, you might get away with serving the same clients without following any rules. And that is going to be a problem as we look ahead.
What changes in terms of... I kind of want to just delve in a little bit into DeFi, because obviously, while this regulates centralized exchanges and the likes, nothing has really been covered with DeFi. John, how do you view this? I mean, do you now see this actually creating a stiffer competition with DeFi? Does it make it harder to compete with DeFi with such regulations in place? What happens now?
I think that's this is an evolution, to the earlier question. It's very much like how any money laundering financing evolved over decades. It's an evolution in the global rules. That's, I think, what we'll see within crypto. It's going to be an evolution in these main geographies. For DeFi, lending, staking, I think that's part of that evolution. That's not in MiCA. It's part of the next step on how that is defined. So the regulator's job is not done. I mean, it's definitely, it's an evolving process for them, and we'll have to continue.
Okay, final question for you, John. Jack kind of indicated the EU wants to get ahead, but there's an internal competition happening in the EU, the 27 nations. What we understand is that MiCA is kind of standard in all these 27 nations, and the difference is going to be around how each of these nations actually implements. That's critical. So my question is, which nations would entities be most attracted to, according to you?
It's there should that's why it's harmonized, right? It really should be consistent across the board, but there are always a little bit of differences. Some of the biggest things is just our regulators. Do they have that experience in the crypto space? We're in Luxembourg. We've been here since 2015. Luxembourg, as a regulator, has a lot of experience within the crypto industry. So those are some of the first things, if you're a business coming into the EU, looking at where do I set up my base and get my license? Do I have a regulator that sort of understands the kind of business model I have and what I'm trying to achieve?
All right. Okay. I hear Luxembourg. Thanks so much for that anyway. Okay, thank you to reporter covering the EU, Jack Schickler, and the Bitstamp Chief Operating Officer, John Ehlers. Much appreciated. Thanks so much for being with us.